Hello, and thank you for joining us for our News 13 roundtable discussion. Helene, weather that changed the mountains. I'm Jason Boyer.
And I'm meteorologist Meghan Danahey. You know, we chose this venue, New Belgium Brewing, because it sits right on top of the French Broad River behind us, and of course the River Arts District is behind us as well.
Yeah, that's right. And in the next half hour, you are going to hear from 4 different experts in the fields of climatology, meteorology, engineering, and geology. We will not only learn about just how extreme the storm was, but how it forever changed our region physically and economically. We will also discuss ways we can make our communities more resilient in the future and what that will likely cost.
All right, we need to meet our experts who are here today. We're going to start on this side with Dr. Philip Prince, a geologist with Appalachian Landslide Consultants LLC here in Asheville. You've studied hundreds of historic landslides in the region and worked to better understand how our landscape behaves during extreme weather. So we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And then we move on to Dr. Stephanie Pilkington. Did I get it?
Yes, you did.
Professor of Engineering at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and expert in community resilience to natural disasters. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Excellent, excellent. And on my left, we have Dr. John Euling. He is with the North Carolina Institute for Climate Studies at North Carolina State University and also works as a research scientist for the National Center for Environmental Information. Thank you for being here. And on my left as well, Tricia Palmer, a meteorologist for the National Weather Service here in the area for the past 26 years. Currently the warning coordination meteorologist in Greenville-Spartanburg, overseeing outreach and preparedness efforts, along with providing high-impact weather briefings and supporting key decision makers in local, state, and federal government. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, let's get into this.
Let's do it. Let's start with you, Dr. John Euling. Let's talk a little bit about how this fits into perspective for historical context. You know, a lot of people ask me that haven't lived here, didn't experience it, how bad was it really? And I tell them, look, it was our Katrina, it was our Andrew, our Hugo. In your opinion, does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, that really does fit the bill. This was definitely the storm of record. And so as a NOAA scientist, we oftentimes, with NOAA's NCEI, we like to put storms into a historical context. And this beat out the 1916 flood. It's the worst flood that we have on record. Many of the rivers in the area set their all-time records. For instance, the Swananoa River set its all-time record. The French Broad River here in Asheville set its all-time record. The Nolechucky, among many others. And it really was the storm of record for this part of the state and for this region as a whole.
Yeah, we're going to get more into the destructive power of that moving water and even landslides and how that affected our infrastructure in a little bit. But yeah, in historical context, all that information is actually going to be kept here at NCEI in Asheville.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, we pride ourselves in having a long record and all the history for all these weather events across not just our region but across the entire country as a whole. So it's nice that we have that and that capability and that ability to be able to put these storms and these events into that historical context to tell you how often this type of event will occur and whether an event like this has ever occurred in the region.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to Tricia now. Tricia, you and the entire staff at the National Weather Service were forecasting a worst-case scenario using language in your statements such as catastrophic, historic, and life-threatening. Do you think the public was prepared for what eventually happened?
That's a tough question to answer because our primary partner is in emergency management. So we brief emergency management, we brief you guys in the media. We tried desperately to get the word out. You mentioned the word catastrophic. We first used that word on Tuesday afternoon before the storm. We sent out social media posts, we sent out public information statements, we put out information on NOAA Weather Radio. But we know that we can't reach everybody. Our forecast area, the 46 counties that we cover, we have over 5.6 million residents, and we just know that we can't reach everybody in the public. So we know that we rely on you guys in media to be a force multiplier. We rely on our partners in emergency management to be the boots on the ground to reach the folks, to help get that dire communication out to the public. So we know that not everybody was reached, but we certainly did our best to try to get that ominous message out to as many people as we could.
And we're going to talk about getting that message out in just a minute, but I also want to address the fact that many flash flood warnings were issued for obvious reasons, but also issued a total of 34 flash flood emergencies during Helene. Tell our viewers the difference between a flash flood warning and a flash flood emergency.
Okay, so when we issue flash flood warnings, there are actually 3 different levels. So we have the lowest level, which is just your standard. There's no standard flash flood warning, but for meteorological terms, a standard flash flood warning, which you might compare to, say, minor flood stage. This is more common flooding with a minimal emergency response. Once we start seeing more widespread flash flooding, we can upgrade that to what we call a considerable flash flood warning. That will then alert on your phones, that wireless emergency alert, and this is compared to maybe moderate flood stage. We are expecting more widespread emergency response, property, maybe some structural damage, infrastructure damage, maybe to roads at that point. And then the top level is that flash flood emergency, and that is a widespread emergency response. That is also called the catastrophic. So that's your flash flood emergency, and that's when we are telling people, do not get on the roads unless you're fleeing the flood waters. Before Helene, we had only issued 10 of these in our forecast area. So you can see 10 total. So you can just see how horrible Helene was from a perspective. We started issuing the headline flash flood emergency in 2014. That's when it was introduced, and then we broke up those 3 levels in 2020.
Incredible. So what are some of the ways to get these weather alerts, especially in a situation like Helene where communication was breaking down?
Well, we definitely encourage people to have multiple ways to receive warnings. The standard way that most people receive them now is on their smartphones with those wireless emergency alerts that I talked about. People can watch their favorite television station, but as you mentioned, when all communications are down, who would have guessed that in 2024 we'd lose all communications? So an oldie but a goodie is NOAA weather radio. Radio communications were still up. So whether it's a battery operated weather radio, a hand crank weather radio, those are fantastic ways. And especially if you're camping or hiking, those are great ways to be able to still receive warnings or just forecast updates to find out what's going on wherever you may be traveling.
There's solar power ones too, which is also a good thing.
And you can get these at your local hardware store. You can also just
online,
go directly to the source online.
Absolutely. So having multiple ways to receive warnings, again, social media, online, the wireless emergency alerts on your phone, TV stations, but weather radio is an oldie but a goodie.
Now, having an emergency kit in situations like this, no matter what kind of weather impacts you, it's a great idea. What are some of the things that we should include in those kits?
Well, your kits, it sort of depends on if you're at home or if you're on the road, and it's going to depend on your personal situation. Do you have infants? Do you have elderly? Do you have pets? So you need to be thinking about what you need for your personal situation. You basically need a gallon of water per person per day. If you have anybody with medications, make sure you have medications. If you've got babies, make sure you have baby supplies. If you've got elderly, again, hitting on the medications. If we're concerned about losing power, you've got to have a way. If you need power, say if you need oxygen, you've got to have a way with a generator, or there are more small solar power battery packs that you can get now. So those are standard things that we recommend. But again, water, having non-perishable foods. If it's the winter, if you're in your vehicle, have blankets, have other ways to make sure that you are safe in your vehicle in case you get stranded. But in a situation like this, having the water, non-perishable food, and those supplies for the folks that you may be caring for.
Great information. Great information.
It is. And you also need to know your location too. If you're in an evacuation prone zone, then your kit may look different.
Exactly.
Than somebody who may have to ride it out at their house. They know they're not going to flood, but they know they're going to be without power for multi-day time period, and so your zone. I think.
Yeah,
exactly.
Knowing your zone, and it's not so much an informational thing that people get right away. I mean, a lot of people move here from other states, and they don't necessarily understand that, hey, if you build, and we'll get into this with you, Dr. Phillip and Dr. Pinkleton, about the steep slopes and building there, and how that's a hazard.
Yeah, and something that the National Weather Service does not have a specific warning for. That doesn't exist.
Right, we do not issue landslide warnings. We put landslide information, hazard information, calls to action in our flash flood warnings. Those are embedded within the flash flood warnings. And we collaborate with folks like Philip and other landslide geology experts to figure out where areas that we need to target for that hazard information.
Great segue.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to put you on the spot now.
Okay.
Are you
I'm
ready?
Absolutely.
Another deadly and destructive aspect of Helene, as we've discussed, is the landslides. Over 2,000 documented.
Documented. There are many more than that. 5,000, 6,000. We won't know for sure until we receive new LiDAR imagery, sort of ground scanning imagery of the mountains. But suffice it to say, it's in the thousands. And in terms of the regional scope of the event, much like it's the storm of record in terms of flooding, it can probably be considered the same in terms of effects on slopes.
So that's without having the warnings for those specifically. I mean, they're in the language. I mean, as a geologist, why is it so important to know the risks? How can people prepare for them? We lost 30 people in these slides.
It's a difficult question to answer, and honestly, before Helene, I would say that the bulk of our work with Appalachian Landslide Consultants, much of which was through the North Carolina Geological Survey, much of the work was geared towards trying to help people understand the potential for a storm like this. But if you've never seen one, that's very difficult to understand and to visualize. People need to understand where they are in the land. They need to understand where their house sits with respect to slopes. The majority of the people who lost their lives to landsliding were not themselves living on an incredibly steep slope. They were at the base of an incredibly steep slope. And to take that a step further, they were where a concave portion of the slope, be that a very small stream valley or just a low area on the slope, directed landslide material to where they were. There are products available through the North Carolina Geological Survey that can help you understand the risk where you are, but you have to know ahead of time that you should be evaluating those. And we don't have storms like this every single year, so it's difficult to keep it on people's minds.
Thank goodness. Now, in 2004, we had back-to-back hurricanes Francis and Ivan. As a result of those storms, we had a significant landslide in Macon County.
Correct.
Called the Peaks Creek landslide. It killed 4 people. So they do happen, but certainly not frequently.
They do, and Peaks Creek, if you were to go on Google Earth today, and you were to look where that Peaks Creek, it was specifically a debris flow landslide, which is why it traveled a couple miles from where it started high on the mountain. And again, the people who fell victim to it were living on a stream and much flatter land, so it came to them. If you looked at that area on Google Earth today, it's revegetated. The trees are younger, but there is not a scar that is an immediate reminder of that happening. And that's one of the struggles we face in this landscape. The mountains are absolutely covered with the scars of previous storm events that may not have been Helene's, but produced a tremendous number of landslides. We just don't see them. You actually have to be a person in my line of work that looks at this surface imagery to see them. So it's tough to keep it at the forefront of citizens' thinking when it's just not a part of daily life, even yearly life.
We have a lot of people coming here. We see construction on slopes all the time. This is not something that's these will happen again. So should we be weary of building on slopes?
You should be wary of again of where you are in the landscape, and the reason I keep saying that again is because you can live in what looks to you like a flat place, but in cases of extreme precipitation, a fluid mass of boulders and mud and trees will come to you sometimes from a great distance away. Now, if you are living on slopes, water management on your property is critically important. Where are your gutters draining? Is ditching on roadways near your home, in your neighborhood, whatever you like, is that appropriate to handle large amounts of runoff? Are culverts big enough to carry it? If runoff
flows across roads and wets embankments, they can start debris flows. So there's a vast array of considerations that need to be on our mind, and hopefully after this event they'll stay there.
And there's actually criteria that through the Weather Service and USGS that you've determined the risk of landslides, and there's a certain amount of rain, is that right?
That's correct. The quoted threshold is 5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. And honestly, in the mountains of western North Carolina, storms produce 5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours with some irregularity. The challenge with that is they don't always produce debris flow landslides. And so that might say, well, maybe you should up that threshold. Other variables, how wet is the soil before the storm? It's complex. You need to hold it to that 5 inches in 24 hours threshold. If you see that much rainfall, you need to be aware and you need to know where you are.
It's amazing to think about when you say debris flow, and you just mentioned what all is in there. It's boulders, it's trees,
That's right.
It's anything else picked up along the way.
It is, and the danger in that type of a landslide is its mobility, its speed. It moves like a fluid. It moves almost like water. It can travel a great distance. The density of the material, because there's so much rock in it, it's about half solid material, if not a bit more. So it weighs about twice as much as water does. They can move 30 miles an hour.
Wow.
So you can.
It's incredible.
Yeah, you can add that up, and it's extremely destructive. It's sort of the most destructive natural event that you can expect to see in the mountains here.
And then multiply that by thousands that we saw.
Absolutely.
And Helene, Dr. Pilkington, you're an expert on civil engineering, on resiliency for urban development. Asheville's water system, of course, as we know, was decimated by Helene, taking 2 months to completely be restored. Power was lost for weeks in many cases. And I think the curveball that maybe none of us saw coming was the absolute breakdown of the communication system. That happened to us, and so communications were limited. In your opinion, was Asheville and the region around it prepared for a disaster of this magnitude? And go.
And go. Well, that actually ties into what you were saying. I mean, if you're looking statistically, I mean, if the previous biggest flood was 1916, then no. But that's not more saying it's a criticism. It's more so saying that when we build to the fact of how likely is something going to happen in a location. So our codes, our building ordinances, all of that is based on likelihood. So statistics of everything happening,
Risk
right?
factors.
So we take all your guys' data and we're like, okay, well, here's the historical pattern, and we choose what risk we're willing to accept when we put in those, when we create new building codes and we do zoning and everything. And so, no, I would say not prepared, but at the same point, I'm not sure if it's saying that you should have been. And then the other thing, as you're saying this, you mentioned the communication breakdown. What's interesting is that what that brought to mind for me when you're saying it is Hurricane Sandy. Okay, so New York, this was a huge thing. So when it hit Manhattan, the whole communication system went down. I mean, that was another example. I mean, it's a completely different type of location, but it also had a communication breakdown. So it was very similar despite the locational differences. And there's an aspect to that we kind of have to start thinking about as we move forward with how we plan and how we build in the future.
Right, and that was the $60 billion, the estimated cost for this storm. And we've got to rebuild. I mean, this is Asheville, it's Western North Carolina. We're not just going to drop off the map. So how do we go forward there? What kinds of things do we consider?
So considering moving forward, my biggest question is like, there's a risk, there's a benefit analysis you have to look at. And I say this as kind of, a civil engineer. After Katrina happened, a lot of civil engineers internally joked, okay, well, we just got to pick up and move New Orleans. Well, that's not going to happen. Right. We're not going to pick up and move New Orleans. You can't do that. And so, people's homes are here. And so there are methods we can go about in the future. Sometimes we got to ask ourselves, do we have to look at areas by rivers and rezone that? And even driving up here, I noticed some of that's already been done. There's parks and green spaces along the river. Excellent. That's exactly what we want to see, because that's the stuff you want filtering water and keeping it from getting to your infrastructure. Other things I've seen questions in some research articles are, do we start building houses where you lift them up like you do on the coast? And do you do that? And I mean, to be perfectly honest, that's a case by case basis. It's expensive to do that. And so it comes with funding restrictions on that. And that's really the crux to that part.
Dollars.
Is population a bigger factor into this too? I mean, you were mentioning Hurricane Sandy and New York City, a city with so many millions of people that it has everything, right?
Yeah.
It should have been ready. But even that size of a disaster, it doesn't depend on the population, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. You know, a small town versus a major city, it's going to have a major impact no matter what.
Yeah, and the same part of that is that and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse sometimes when I say this. We have population growth, but at the same time we have an aging infrastructure. And I feel like me saying this is nothing new. You know, so, and when you mention wastewater, I don't know specifically in this case, but sometimes what's under the ground in our water and wastewater systems, I mean, we're over 50 years old at that point. We're probably, some of those might still be lead pipes. I know in areas where I grew up outside of Boston, some of them were still brick. And so we just, some of them are just old. And so we're trying to keep up with a population continues to grow and keep our infrastructure in pace with that.
Wow.
It's a lot to wrap your mind around. I mean, we've got, generations of families in these mountains. They're not going anywhere.
And the cost of actually doing something is pretty massive, but the cost of not doing something, as we saw with Helene,
is also massive.
It's massive. So we have to weigh that and figure out a way to do that. And of course, like you said, generation after generation living in the mountains, what does an individual do? Because they're not part directly of a town or a community, they're kind of on their own. They're going to have to decide how they live in the future in terms of the slopes and near the rivers, and it's a difficult thing. We're never going to change people's mindset in terms of their lifestyle. We want people to live here because it is accessible into the outdoors and it's scenic and the beauty and naturally of it. But it's a challenge.
I mean, we all love the mountains. Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking when you were talking about flooding earlier is in communication, so like tying those together, was that one of the things I find that to help conceptualize this, can I stand? Sure.
Let's see.
Okay. So one of the things I like to do, because I realize this right here is probably, give or take, this is about a foot on each side. All right. So if I then another foot vertically, God, that was a lot. Okay. Let's say about a foot. I'm testing my spatial reasoning. So another foot. Okay. Right there, that you've got a box. That box is probably already smaller than something I bring on an airplane. All right. But that box, if it's water, is 62 pounds. And so now I'm going to move it and I'm going to throw the thing. And so when you have floods, that's the part I always want to try and get across, is that just this little box is 62 pounds. And that's what's moving when you have a flooded condition.
We do underestimate the force of water quite often. I mean, wind gets a lot of attention because we see that more often, knocking trees or branches down and strong thunderstorms or whatnot, but the amount of water that was moving through these tributaries and rivers, I mean, everything became virtually destructible for so many reasons, right?
You make a great point, because when it comes to hurricanes and tropical cyclones, historically it's not the wind that causes the most fatalities, it's the water, whether that be inland flooding or storm surge. The water is what causes the most fatalities.
Yeah, it catches more people off guard for that reason, right? They don't expect it to be rising as quickly or moving. You can look out your window and think, I can cross that, but...
Well, and you also go back to what you said about it's a new storm of record. I mean, basically, we've all just been through something that has set a brand new bar.
Right.
We weren't here in 1916. And, when we were looking at pictures, those were the first pictures I'd ever seen of this area in 1916. I don't know how to put that in perspective for myself or for the viewers necessarily. So I think it's important for us to wrap our minds around and to understand that we've all just gone through something together that has set a new historical bar.
Right.
And
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that we found very useful when we were increasing our ominous messaging leading up to the event was using those comparisons, using those analogs, and taking advantage of the generational memory that folks have here in the mountains.
Yep.
So as we were looking at the rainfall forecast leading up to the event, and it got progressively worse, and we were, okay, this is going to be like Fred in 2021, or this is going to be like Ivan and Francis in 2004. And then when it was going to look like 1916, the responses we got from emergency managers, the silence on the other end of the phone. I talked to the Bat Cave fire chief, for example, and he said, there's a video out here where he talks about it. He said the Weather Service, they said, when they said it was going to be like 1916, that his grandparents are from there, and it destroyed Bat Cave, and so that triggered something in his mind. And basically, all these little communities, these little fire stations, were getting their folks together and saying, they said 1916. They, the ubiquitous they, the weather people, they. They said 1916. This is what we're going to do. And I heard from community after community. We heard it last week in the workshop that a lot of these first responders were going out and handing people Sharpies along rivers. Okay, you need to leave. If you don't want to leave, we need you to write down your name and social security number on your arms. That is a tried and true practice along the coast to get people to evacuate. But to hear about something like that here in the mountains is unheard of.
Absolutely.
But it worked, and it got a lot of people to leave. And that the individual door knocking, using those air horns, and to try to emphasize this is what they are saying about the storm, this is how much rain is going to come, you're living along a creek. So emergency managers, sheriffs, firefighters, all of these first responders were going out there, and the effort that we made to communicate to them, but really their heroic efforts, that those boots on the ground to get people to leave, the thousands of lives that those men and women saved.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
I wanted to add something here from a climate standpoint. I go to a lot of schools, we go to schools, talk to them, educate them on general meteorology, but a lot of the teachers will ask us, can you address Helene? Absolutely, reassuring the children that, a disaster that you live through, it's not likely to happen again. But how much evidence is there that these are going to happen more frequently?
Yes, so basically when we're talking about climatology, and it's important to make a distinction between what a weather event is and climate in general. So a weather event is something that you may get an extreme weather event once in a lifetime, but climate is talking about how those trends are changing over a long period of time. And so one thing that I like to do as a climatologist is try to figure out, are these events getting more frequent, and what is the likelihood or the return period of an event like this, and is that return period increasing? And one thing that we've seen, especially over the Southern Appalachians, is that these types of tropical rainfall events are actually getting more extreme with time, and we're seeing more of them. And so that's not to say that we're going to get another Helene next year, but that's to say that the likelihood of getting a rainfall event of Helene's magnitude is going up. And so we're basically moving that distribution of what is possible up, and that's what we care about as climatologists.
It's important to remember this from our perspective, from the landslide perspective. We sort of see what is almost like fossil weather, if you will, because the scars remain on the landscape from events like this. If you were to have a Helene in the Blue Ridge of Virginia, where Camille is a part of the collective memory just from 1969, people would have a greater idea of the potential outcomes of a storm like this. But we see through the historical record, one that Trish and I talked about it earlier today, going all the way back actually to 1847 in Clay County, there was a very extreme storm event that produced incredible landsliding that happened to be documented at the time, and that was recorded and is now a part of history. The only remnant of it are these very subtle scars in the landscape. So events that produce Helene-like effects, possibly not over the region, but equally destructive, perhaps even more intense in a smaller area, they're just a part of Appalachian climatology. It's just whether or not you see one in your generation or the generation before you, or even in your zip code or area code, you know. But if you tour the length of the Appalachians, there are a number of these events that are legitimately more intense than Helene in terms of precipitation, just in a smaller area. So you can't exclude the possibility, and you've really never been able to. And it's interesting to consider what that potential will look like going forward.
Yeah, and one thing that was really interesting with Helene is not so much the magnitude of the rainfall on any given day, but the prolonged rainfall over several days. That was really the difference between Helene and other extreme rainfall events. If you took the rainfall that occurred on any given day and put it in isolation, you might get some flooding, but it would maybe nowhere to the level that we actually saw during Helene. It's only the fact that we had those 3 days of rainfall total and that prolonged period of rainfall that really set the stage for the event that we actually saw.
Well, and on that same note, and probably with the landslides too, I mean, it wasn't just Helene, right?
Right.
We had the predecessor.
The predecessor rain event, and that's what I was hinting at.
Yeah.
Basically,
The pre.
Yeah.
So the predecessor rain event, or pre, as we like to call it, basically we had it set the stage for a really nasty rainfall event. And again, despite what you may hear, it was very well forecasted. The rainfall itself was extremely well forecasted, and the event was really well forecasted several days in advance. And again, we saw this setup, but again, how do you convey that? And you were hinting about this yourself, is how do you convey that risk appropriately when most people that live here, especially the people that aren't from this area, and even the people that were from this area, have never seen anything in their lifetime even remotely to that scale before. And so it's difficult to convey how bad is something going to be if they've never seen it before themselves.
Well, and this may have been well forecast, and yes, I mean, it certainly was. The whole weather enterprise, up, down, sideways, everybody was in lockstep. But when we talk about these individual extreme events, like Philip was talking about, we could have a squall line that comes through, a summertime thunderstorm that sets up over one area. Those are not going to be as well forecast. It's not going to be up and down the weather enterprise with the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center and everybody and their brother on board with the same messaging, because they're going to be more isolated in nature. And not everybody is open 24/7 like the Weather Service is. I mean, we love our geology experts, but they're not always on call 24/7. I'll call Philip up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Hey, what do you think about this rainfall event? Right. So that happened with it. We talked about the Danahey Gorge event, last week. So with these isolated events that can be extreme, and if it impacts you, it's terrible, right? It doesn't. If it's your life, it's horrible for you. If it's your home, it's the worst event ever for you. And so these the smaller scale but equally as extreme events, whether it's flash flooding or landslides or whatever it may be, it could be a tornado, but if it impacts you, it's devastating.
If I can ever contribute at 2 o'clock in the morning, please take whatever steps are necessary. I mean, it will be an honor legitimately to do so.
Very good to know.
Megan and I and Julia and Karen, we discussed this too, about our biggest concern post-Helene was what happens with the next heavy rainfall event. Will we know how this water is going to flow now that the rivers and tributaries have been changed? And I know you guys studied that.
We have, and again, that's an opportunity to look to the past. A big question in the geology community afterwards, particularly from landowners who were affected by the debris flow landslides, is, well, this just happened. Is it going to happen again in the same spot? It's a difficult question to answer. The area which itself produced the debris flow is reduced in its capacity to do so because so much material left, but there's no reason that other parts of the slope nearby could not behave in the same way with the next storm. Stream beds are shaped differently. They're going to presumably carry water differently. A tremendous amount of material was moved in this storm. If you were able to look at this from a very sterile standpoint, imagine that the terrible human toll was not a part of it. Just what happened here naturally. A huge amount of rock and soil stored in the mountains left the mountains. That's what mountains do. That's why these mountains look interesting. They're a dynamic landscape. So there legitimately was, in effect, a small amount of geologic change, and it's not possible to just look at it and immediately know what the next step will be. But it's important to say, Hickory Nut Gorge, Chimney Rock is an interesting example. There have been in the 20th century 3 or 4 debris flow events above Chimney Rock, as well as big flooding events. Each of those storms has produced new debris flows, sometimes within just 100 or 200 feet of each other. You don't see repetition, just different parts of the slope will wake up. You can't predict that, but you can always know where it's going to go. And the biggest thing for people to understand going forward is just where am I in the landscape? Is it possible that I will face this again under the right weather conditions? And that's really the most foundational aspect of moving forward.
And people react differently, right? I mean, we can't force everybody to leave their home in these situations, but it's almost like we need to be social scientists at the same time to dive into the psyche and see how people react. It's difficult because everybody's stubborn at some point, right? And I don't want and leaving your home, which is your safest place, and telling them to do that is counterintuitive to most people. Why would I leave when I'm safest here? But you may not be, like in Helene.
Run from the water, hide from the wind.
There you go.
It's
and people are definitely, they're part of the equation when we talk about the impacts of these events.
Yeah.
You know, we always, and I mean, we've done a lot of work with like our infrastructure and how we build and our codes and everything. But when you're talking, if I've got a system for your water system, and then I've got another layer that's a system for transportation, and then I've got another layer that's all my buildings, and then I've got another layer that's all my communication and power, and those aren't in a vacuum. They connect to each other, right? And how they connect is the people. And so like one of the areas I have moved towards studying is the fact that, you know, the fact you're civil engineers, civil kind of implies people. The people aspect of that, how do we use buildings? How do we maintain them? How do we use roads? How do we maintain them? And how does that play a role when it comes into these extreme events, you know? Especially in your area.
Absolutely.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of my neighborhood with all its like,
Absolutely.
We live near a river, all its gradated step downs.
Right.
That in one area I specifically said I would not buy a house there because they engineered it and they moved it around to flow water, but as an engineer I'm looking at it and I'm like, nope. I mean, I know you did some calculations, but I feel like nature usually wins out in those calculation aspects.
Yes, especially in a Helene level event, but
Yep.
whether it be road embankments or channelizing and straightening rivers. If you looked in the Swannanoa River in downtown Swannanoa, where flooding exposed the bank material, there's a tremendous amount of fill and artificial bank in there because people are taking advantage of the flat ground along the river, and they're trying to, and this, it's a generational thing. It's not, you don't do it, you know, and next year you've got more land. Humans sort of creep and encroach, but that absolutely alters the outcomes, and we have to be aware of it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't add on to that by giving a shout out to our water science folks at the USGS who are out there all the time measuring the rivers, measuring the flow to make sure that we have accurate flow ratings so that we can then pull that into our hydrologic models, which then results in hydrologic forecasts that we can then relay to emergency managers, you guys in the media, and the public. But it's all a very complex relationship, but everybody is working together on this.
All right. Well, big thank you to all of you. What a great discussion, and all of our experts for being here with us today. You've helped educate and inform the public and our viewers on these types of disasters, and better prepared is what we want people to be, and I think we've really accomplished that today, so thank you very much.
Well, and conversations like this will keep going. That's the thing I think with this storm, is that we're all going to move forward with this new bar and figure it out together how we can better weather something else that comes down the right. I want to also thank New Belgium for hosting us today. It's a lovely patio. We've got the beautiful French Broad, and of course the River Arts District, which is coming back.
They are.
One day at a time.
Progress.
They're just opening stuff,
Well, thank you everyone, and be safe.